You know that nightmare where you're naked in front of a crowd? For William Burgess, it was worse. He looked his boss in the eye, pointed at his wife, and said, "This is Tara, my maid." He thought he was being smooth. He didn't realize he was actually handing his resignation letter to the billionaire owner standing right next to him. Welcome to Stories That Touch. Before we begin, say hello in the comments and let us know which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these emotions travel. By the end of this video, rate the story from 0 to 10 and tell us if it touched your heart. If you love narratives full of twists and deep emotion, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment. Now, get comfortable and let the story unfold. The air in the grand ballroom on Clay Street smelled of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and the distinct metallic scent of anxiety. William Burgess inhaled it greedily. He stood in a circle of men he barely knew but desperately wanted to impress, clutching a crystal tumbler of scotch tight enough to leave fingerprints. Beside him stood Tara. She was wearing a navy blue silk dress, simple, high-necked, and entirely invisible in a room screaming with sequins and gold leaf. She stood with her hands folded, calm and still, like a statue someone had forgotten to unveil. "So, Burgess?" Marcus Sterling asked, swirling his drink. "Who's the quiet beauty? You haven't introduced us." William's heart hammered. He looked at the senior VP, then at the other investors watching him. He looked at Tara. In his mind, she was a liability. She was too plain, too quiet. She didn't look like a partner's wife. She looked like someone who should be holding a tray. Panic, sharp and sudden, hijacked his tongue. He needed to distance himself from her simplicity. He needed to be the big man in the room. William let out a short, nervous laugh. He winked at the group. "Oh, that's just Tara," he said, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual. "She's my maid. I just brought her along to help manage things tonight. You know how hard it is to get good help these days." The silence lasted for a microsecond. Then the men laughed. It was a clubby, exclusive sound. Tara didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She turned her head slowly, her dark eyes locking onto William's face. She swallowed the shame with a grace that William mistook for submissiveness, but which was actually discipline. "Right," William said, eager to move on now that he had scored his social point. He turned to Tara, his voice dropping to a dismissive whisper. "Why don't you wait over there? By the service entrance. It's out of the way." He pointed toward the swinging kitchen doors. Tara looked at the doors. Then she looked at him. "You want me to stand by the kitchen?" she asked quietly. "I want you to be comfortable," William lied, already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "Just hang tight. I'll come get you when the speeches start." He turned his back on her, striding into the crowd, convinced he had just masterfully managed a crisis. He didn't see the way the waiter passing by paused and bowed his head slightly to Tara. He didn't see the cold calculation in her eyes. And he certainly didn't see Michael Vance, the terrifying CEO of Whitmore Holdings, enter the room and stop dead in his tracks, staring directly at the maid William had just discarded 5 hours earlier. William sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the invitation on his laptop screen. The annual Whitmore Gala. This wasn't just a party, it was the finish line. "William?" He snapped the laptop shut and turned. Tara was standing in the doorway of their bedroom, holding up 2 dresses. One was red and cut low. The other was the navy blue silk. "Which one?" she asked. William stood up, sighing. He walked over and touched the red dress. "This one, obviously. It pops. It says confidence. It says, I belong here." Tara frowned, lowering the red fabric. "It's too loud, William. It's a business gala, not a red carpet. I'm wearing the blue." William threw his hands up, pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug he had bought on credit. Why do you always do this? Why do you insist on being invisible? Lydia Collins is going to be there. She wears things that make people stop talking. She looks like an asset. You look like you're trying to blend into the curtains. I am an asset, William, Tara said calmly, tossing the blue dress onto the bed. I just don't need to scream it. You do tonight, William snapped. The board is watching. The shadow board is watching. He grabbed his scotch glass from the nightstand. He had started drinking early. Those cowards rejected the Argento proposal today. 6 months of work. Killed. Just like that. Tara paused, her hand on the zipper of the blue dress. The Argento deal had a massive liability clause regarding environmental compliance in the Mekong Delta. If the regulations tightened, the firm would have lost billions. William rolled his eyes. You've been reading those blogs again. It was a liquidity issue, Tara. Pure math. They're just risk-averse dinosaurs. They don't have the stomach for a visionary like me. He fixed his tie in the mirror, adjusting his jawline to look more like the men in the magazines. But tonight, I'm going to corner Michael. I'm going to show him that I'm the leader this company needs. And I need you to play the part. Smile. Laugh at their jokes. And for God's sake, don't bore them with your insights. He turned to her, looking her up and down with a critical sneer. Just try not to embarrass me, he said. Tara looked at him in the mirror. Her expression was unreadable. I'm ready, William. The drive to Clay Street was silent. William checked his phone incessantly, muttering opening lines under his breath. Tara watched the city pass by, the buildings she owned shares in, the skyline she had quietly shaped. When the car pulled up to the curb, William's frown vanished, replaced by a gleaming, predatory smile. Game time, he whispered. Stay close. But let me lead. They walked into the ballroom, into the humidity and the noise. William inhaled the scent of power greedily. He led her toward the circle of investors. He ordered his drink. And then, faced with the pressure of the moment, he looked at his wife in her simple blue dress and decided she wasn't enough. So, he decided to turn her into a joke. The change in the room wasn't auditory. The jazz band continued its smooth, unobtrusive rhythm. The clinking of silverware against fine china didn't cease. The hum of 100 strategic conversations persisted. But the temperature of the room plummeted. It was a psychic shift, a collective tightening of spines and adjusting of ties that rippled outward from the main double doors. William felt it before he saw it. He was midway through a joke about liquidity ratios with a junior partner from the London office, a man he didn't respect, but needed as an audience, when he saw the junior partner's eyes dart past William's shoulder and widen. The man stopped laughing. He straightened up, wiping a non-existent crumb from his lapel. William turned. Michael Vance had arrived. The CEO of Whitmore Holdings was a man who occupied space with the density of a black hole. He was 60, with hair the color of polished steel and a face carved from granite. He didn't walk, he patrolled. He moved with a heavy predatory grace that made the tuxedo-clad executives around him look like children playing dress-up. Michael didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply entered, and the room reoriented itself around his gravity. William's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment. He had spent 3 weeks rehearsing the perfect greeting, casual enough to suggest intimacy, respectful enough to acknowledge hierarchy. He abandoned the junior partner without a word and maneuvered himself toward the center aisle, calculating the trajectory Michael would take toward the podium. Eye contact, William told himself. Establish dominance, then submit. The alpha acknowledgement. He stepped into Michael's peripheral vision, holding his scotch glass at chest height, flashing a tight, confident smile. Michael, William said, pitching his voice to carry over the low din. Excellent turnout. It was a good line, It implied ownership, as if William and Michael were co-hosts surveying their domain. Michael didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. His gaze flicked toward William for a fraction of a second, a cold, blue assessment that held no recognition, only dismissal, before sliding away. It was the way a driver looks at a traffic cone, an obstacle to be navigated around, not a person to be engaged. William stood frozen as the CEO brushed past him, the wake of his cologne, sandalwood, and cold cash washing over him. The rejection was absolute. William felt the blood drain from his face. He looked around quickly to see if anyone had witnessed the snub, his stomach churning with the acid of humiliation. He's just busy, William told himself frantically. He's focused on the speech. He didn't see me. He couldn't have seen me. But the terror began to gnaw at him. What if Michael had seen him? What if the shadow board had already poisoned the well? What if the Argento rejection wasn't just a business decision, but a prelude to a firing? William watched Michael moving through the crowd. The CEO wasn't heading for the stage yet. He wasn't heading for the VIP table where the senators and investors sat. He was scanning the perimeter of the room. His eyes were narrowing, hunting for something. William followed the gaze. Michael looked past the ice sculptures. He looked past the orchestra. He looked past the circle of sycophants trying to grab his hand. His gaze landed on the service entrance. William's breath hitched. There, standing in the drafty shadows next to a stack of extra chairs, was Tara. She was leaning slightly against the marble pillar, holding a glass of water, watching the room with that maddeningly calm expression. To William, she looked starkly out of place. Amidst the sequins and the silk, her navy dress looked severe, almost industrial. She looked like exactly what he had told the investors she was. The help. Oh God, William thought, panic rising in his throat like bile. He sees her. William watched Michael's face. The CEO had stopped moving. He was staring directly at Tara. He didn't blink. His expression was intense, unreadable to the uninitiated. But to William, who spent his life decoding Michael's moods for signs of danger, it looked like irritation. He's wondering why there's a maid loitering in the ballroom, William's mind screamed. He's wondering why security hasn't cleared the service area. He thinks she's staff slacking off. It was a disaster. If Michael asked someone who she was, and they repeated William's joke, "Oh, that's Burgess's maid," Michael wouldn't laugh. Michael Vance didn't do humor. He did efficiency. He would see it as a lack of judgment. He would see William as a man who brought baggage to a business war. William saw Michael take a step toward the pillar. Adrenaline flooded William's system. He couldn't let them speak. He couldn't let Michael interrogate her. Tara didn't know the corporate lingo. She didn't know how to defer to a man like Michael. She would say something plain, something honest, and she would inadvertently humiliate William further. She might even mention the Argento deal. She had that stubborn streak. Intercept, William's brain commanded. Neutralize the threat. William set his scotch glass down on a passing waiter's tray, with a clatter that drew a few stares. But he didn't care. He began to move. He didn't run. Running was for junior analysts. But he walked with a speed that bordered on frantic. He cut through a conversation between two real estate moguls, muttering a breathless, "Excuse me," his eyes fixed on the impending collision between his boss and his wife. Across the room, Michael had paused again. The crowd was thick, blocking his path. He was still looking at Tara, and now he raised his hand slightly, perhaps to check his watch, perhaps to signal something. To William, it looked like an accusation. William skirted the chocolate fountain, dodged a woman in a ball gown, and reached the periphery of the room. He was sweating now, a thin sheen of perspiration breaking out under his collar. He reached the pillar just as Tara shifted her weight. She was looking directly at Michael. Her chin was lifted. There was no fear in her eyes, only a steady, quiet acknowledgement. She looked like she was about to nod. William stepped directly into her line of sight, his broad back blocking her view of the CEO completely. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Tara blinked, her connection with the room broken. She looked up at William's flushed face. "I'm drinking water, William. You told me to stand here." "I told you to blend in," William whispered, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Michael hadn't followed him. He saw with relief that the CEO had been cornered by the mayor near the buffet. The danger had passed, but the adrenaline was still poisoning William's blood. "I didn't tell you to gawk at the CEO like a fan." "I wasn't gawking," Tara said calmly. She set her water glass down on a service ledge. "I was just looking." "He saw you, Tara. He was staring right at you." William ran a hand through his hair, ruining the perfect part. "Do you know what he thinks? He thinks you're staff. He thinks you're a waitress who forgot to carry a tray. You're standing by the kitchen for Christ's sake. You put me by the kitchen, William, because you were supposed to be invisible." He grabbed her elbow, his fingers digging into the silk of her sleeve. "Stop looking at him. If he comes over here, you don't speak. You nod, you say, 'Good evening, sir,' and you look at the floor. Do you understand? You do not engage." Tara looked at his hand on her arm. Her expression didn't change, but the air around her seemed to grow still. "You're hurting me." William released her as if burned. He took a step back, adjusting his cuffs, trying to regain the composure that had deserted him. "I'm not hurting you. I'm trying to save us. You don't know Michael Vance. He's a wolf. He smells weakness. And right now, you look like a liability." "Is that what I am?" Tara asked. "A liability? In this room?" William gestured wildly at the chandeliers, the velvet, the gold. "Yes. In this room, you are a variable I can't control. And I need control, Tara. Tonight of all nights." He took a deep breath, smoothing his jacket. The panic was receding, replaced by the familiar simmering resentment. "Just turn around. Face the wall if you have to. Just don't catch his eye again. I have to go fix this." "Fix what?" "The impression you just made," William snapped. "I have to go make sure he knows I'm a serious man, despite everything." He didn't wait for her response. He didn't see the way her eyes hardened, turning from soft brown to something resembling flint. He didn't see her look past him, toward the spot where Michael Vance was shaking off the mayor, his eyes returning once again to the pillar. William turned back, toward the light, toward the noise, toward the illusion. He walked away from the only person in the room who could have saved him, convinced that he was the one doing the saving. Behind him, Tara smoothed the sleeve where he had grabbed her. She watched him disappear into the crowd of tuxedos. Then, she looked across the room again. Michael Vance was still watching. Tara didn't look at the floor. She didn't hide. She lifted her chin, met the CEO's gaze across 50 feet of crowded ballroom, and gave him a single, imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of submission. It was a command. "Start the show," it said. And as William reached the bar, ordering a double scotch to calm his shaking hands, the lights in the grand ballroom began to dim. The dimming of the lights was the signal. Like a tide responding to the moon, the sea of tuxedos and gowns began to shift toward the round tables draped in heavy white linen. The chaotic noise of the cocktail hour settled into the organized murmur of dinner seating. William moved with the current, his double scotch doing its work, smoothing the jagged edges of his earlier panic into a polished, brittle confidence. He checked his table assignment on the placard. Table 4. Single digits. Front row. VIP adjacent. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Table 4 was prime real estate. It was where the partners sat. It was where the people who mattered sat. It was a confirmation, surely, that despite the icy interaction with Michael earlier, William was still inside the inner circle. He navigated toward the front, his hand resting casually in his pocket, nodding to colleagues he had ignored an hour ago. He reached table 4 and pulled out a chair. It offered a direct line of sight to the podium, unobstructed by the oversized floral centerpieces that plagued the lower-tier tables. Before he sat, he indulged in a quick, strategic glance toward the back of the room. He had to squint to see past the sea of heads, past the mid-level managers, past the junior associates, all the way to the swinging double doors of the kitchen service entrance. There, tucked awkwardly between a fire exit and the waiter's station, was table 42. It was the Siberia of the gala, the table where they put the overflow, the last-minute additions, and the people the firm couldn't quite uninvite, but didn't want to see. Tara was there. She was seated with her back to the wall, flanked by a nervous-looking intern and an elderly man William didn't recognize, probably a retired actuary's +1. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a beam of harsh fluorescent light cut across Tara's table, accompanied by the clatter of dishes and the shouting of chefs. It was a terrible seat. It was an insult of a seat. But William felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. She was far away. She was contained. From here, she was just a blurry navy smudge in the distance. No one at table 4 would see her dress. No one would ask her what she did for a living. No one would ask him why he had married a woman with zero ambition. He had successfully quarantined the liability. "Burgess, you made the cut, I see." William turned, his smile engaging automatically. Sitting next to him was Marcus Sterling, a senior VP of acquisitions. Sterling was a shark in a Brioni suit, a man who smelled blood in the water from miles away. "Marcus," William said, taking his seat and unfolding his napkin with a flourish. "Always a pleasure. I see they put us together. They must want the high-energy table closer to the stage." Sterling laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Or they want to keep an eye on us. I heard the seating chart was personally approved by the top brass this year. Usually, HR handles it. This time? It came from the penthouse." William's pulse quickened. Personally approved. That meant Michael knew exactly where William was sitting. He had placed him here, front and center. "Interesting," William said, trying to sound bored. "Micromanagement usually isn't Michael's style." Sterling leaned in, lowering his voice. The air of conspiracy was thick enough to chew. "It is tonight. You haven't heard the rumor?" William paused, his glass hovering halfway to his lips. "I try to avoid the grapevine, Marcus. It interferes with the work." "Suit yourself," Sterling grinned, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of being in the know. "But word coming out of the executive suite is that the majority shareholder is actually in the building." William frowned. "The ghost? I thought that was a myth. I thought the majority shareholder was just a shell corporation in the Caymans." "Apparently not," Sterling whispered, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "Real person. Flesh and blood. And they're here to announce a restructuring. Rumor has it, a new senior partner is being named tonight. Someone to bridge the gap between the old guard and the new vision." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. A new senior partner. Bridge the gap. William sat back in his chair, his mind racing at the speed of light. It fit. It all fit. The Argento deal rejection wasn't a punishment. It was a stress test. They wanted to see if he would fold or if he would fight. And he had fought. God, he had complained about it to everyone who would listen. He had shown passion. He had shown fire. And the seating chart. Michael had placed him here, front and center. Why? To have him close to the stage, to minimize the walk time when his name was called. The snub earlier, the way Michael had ignored him. It wasn't dismissal. It was theater. Michael couldn't show favoritism before the announcement. He had to play it cool until the ink was dry. William looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He clenched them into fists under the table. "It's me," he thought. The realization hit him with the force of a religious conversion. It has to be me. He began to replay the last 5 years in his head, editing the footage in real time to support his delusion. He stripped away the failures, the missed deadlines, the clients he'd lost to competitors. He stripped away the fact that his greatest hits were actually team efforts, where he had merely signed the cover sheet. In his mind, he wasn't the man who relied on his wife to proofread his emails. He was a titan of industry. He was the visionary who had pushed for the tech expansion, which Tara had suggested. He was the relentless force behind the waterfront project, which Tara had quietly funded through a subsidiary to save him from embarrassment when the bank pulled out. He was the protagonist. And this ballroom, this dinner, this night, was his climax. "You look like the cat who ate the canary, Burgess," Sterling said, eyeing him curiously. William took a slow sip of his scotch. "Just thinking about the future, Marcus. It looks bright." He glanced back at table 42 one last time. The distance felt even greater now. It felt symbolic. He was ascending to the stratosphere, and Tara belonged to the ground. She belonged to the domestic sphere, to the quiet evenings, to the laundry and the groceries, and the small, safe life she seemed to crave. "It's better this way," he told himself, watching a waiter accidentally bump into her chair. She didn't complain. She just shifted slightly, making herself smaller. If she were sitting here, William thought, she would ruin this moment. She would ask questions. She would look at him with that confusing mix of love and pity she sometimes wore. She would ground him when he needed to fly. He felt a sudden sharp spike of gratitude that he had introduced her as the maid. It was a kindness, really. It lowered expectations. If anyone asked about her later, after he was named partner, he could laugh it off as an eccentric joke. But for now, it kept her separate. It kept her safe from the spotlight that was about to burn him alive. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. The room fell silent instantly. The clatter of silverware stopped. Michael Vance stood at the podium. The stage was bathed in a stark, white spotlight. Michael looked like a monument. He gripped the sides of the podium with hands that could crush stone. He didn't smile. He didn't do the warm-up jokes that most CEOs did. He waited. He waited until the silence was absolute, until the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning. William straightened his tie. He sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. He fixed his eyes on Michael, projecting an aura of readiness. "I am here, Michael. I am ready to lead." "Thank you all for being here," Michael began, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in the floorboards. "Tonight is not just a celebration of a fiscal year. It is an anniversary." He paused, looking out over the crowd. His gaze swept from left to right, passing over table 4 without pausing. 10 years ago, Michael continued, Whitmore Holdings ceased to exist. A ripple of confusion went through the room. People exchanged glances. This wasn't the standard record profit speech. 10 years ago, Michael said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more intimate, more dangerous. We were insolvent. The 2014 crash had hollowed us out. The banks had walked away. The previous board had packed their golden parachutes and fled. The lights in this building were scheduled to be turned off on a Tuesday. William frowned. He knew the firm had hit a rough patch back then. He was just a junior analyst at another firm at the time, but he had never heard it described as insolvency. The official history was that Whitmore had restructured strategically. I was the COO then, Michael said. I was sitting in my office, drafting the layoff notices for 3,000 employees. I was writing the eulogy for this company. Michael leaned into the microphone. But the lights didn't go off. The room was breathless. Even the waiters had stopped moving. They didn't go off because one person stepped into the breach, Michael said. One person who had no obligation to us. Someone who had watched this firm from the outside, who saw value where the bank saw rot. Someone who wrote a personal check that cleared the debt, recapitalized the pension fund, and saved every single job in this room. William's mind raced. A silent benefactor? Who had that kind of capital? It had to be a foreign oligarch, or a tech mogul. For 10 years, Michael continued, this person has remained in the shadows. They asked for no title. They asked for no office. They asked for no credit. They simply asked that we operate with integrity, that we build something that lasts. Michael's eyes hardened. Sometimes we have failed that request. We have let ego drive decisions. We have let arrogance masquerade as ambition. William felt a slight prickle on the back of his neck. Arrogance masquerading as ambition. That sounded like something the Shadow Board would say about the Argento deal. But surely Michael was talking about the old regime, the people who almost tanked the company. Tonight, Michael said, that ends. He stepped back from the podium, taking the microphone with him. The spotlight followed him as he began to descend the stairs from the stage. The time for shadows is over, Michael declared, his voice booming without the need for the podium's stability. The future of this firm requires clarity. It requires us to acknowledge who we truly serve. William's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might crack a rib. He's coming down. Michael was walking toward the tables. He was walking toward the front. This is it, William thought. He's coming to get me. He's going to pull me up there. He's going to announce that I am the new senior partner, the one chosen to lead the new era. William unbuttoned his jacket, preparing to stand. He rehearsed his humble face. He would shake Michael's hand firmly. He would wave to the crowd. He would look at Marcus Sterling and give a subtle nod. Michael walked past table 1. He walked past table 2. He was closing in on table 4. William held his breath. He could see the beads of sweat on Michael's forehead. He could see the intensity in the older man's eyes. Here it comes. William began to rise, his knees bending, his hand extending slightly. And then, Michael walked past him. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at William. He walked past table 4 with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train, the wind of his passing ruffling the napkin on William's lap. William froze in a half-standing crouch, looking like a man who had dropped his fork. Confusion crashed into him. Where is he going? He turned his head, watching Michael's back. The CEO was marching past the partners. He was marching past the investors. He was heading toward the back of the room, toward the noise, toward the kitchen, toward the service entrance. A murmur of bewilderment rose from the crowd. Necks craned. People stood up to see where the CEO was going. William stood fully now, his face draining of color. He watched as Michael navigated the tight spaces between the overcrowded back tables. And then, Michael stopped. He stopped at table 42, the table by the kitchen door, the table in the draft, the table William had chosen specifically because it was invisible. Michael Vance stood in front of the pillar, the spotlight cutting through the gloom to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air. He stood in front of the woman in the navy dress. William's brain simply refused to process the data. Why is he talking to the maid? He watched as Tara looked up. She didn't look surprised. She set, her fork down gently. She wiped her mouth with her napkin and placed it on the table. And then, in the silence that felt heavy enough to crush a man's skull, Michael Vance extended his hand. William watched from the front of the room, alone in the crowd, as the glass ceiling he thought he was breaking through suddenly reflected his own terrified face, staring back at him. The silence in the grand ballroom was not peaceful. It was pressurized. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion or a natural disaster. 600 people held their breath in unison, their eyes locked on the impossible tableau unfolding near the service entrance. William stood frozen at table 4. He was half bent, his knees locked in a painful, crouching hover, his hand still extended toward empty air. He looked like a statue of ambition, abandoned by its sculptor. His mind was a frantic, glitching loop. He missed me. He overshot. He's confused. He's going to turn around. But Michael Vance did not turn around. The CEO stood before table 42, the spotlight bathing him and the dusty corner in a stark, clinical white. The light caught the scuff marks on the service door. It caught the stack of dirty dishes on a tray a waiter had abandoned in panic. And it caught Tara Burgess, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking up at the most powerful man in the room with an expression of mild patience. The intern sitting next to Tara had stopped breathing. The elderly actuary was staring at his bread roll, as if hoping it would dissolve him. Michael Vance did not speak immediately. He looked down at Tara, his granite face softening in a way William had never seen in 5 years of employment. It wasn't pity. It wasn't condescension. It was something that terrified William far more than anger. It was reverence. Slowly, deliberately, Michael extended his right hand. He didn't offer a handshake. His palm was open, upturned, a solicitation. Tara hesitated for a heartbeat. She glanced at the room, her eyes sweeping over the sea of faces, the partners who had ignored her, the wives who had pitied her dress, and finally, William, stranded in the front row like a shipwreck. Then she placed her hand in Michael's. The room gasped. It was a collective, involuntary sound, sharp and ragged. Michael didn't pull her up. Instead, he did something that defied every rule of modern corporate physics. He kept her hand in his, and he lowered himself. The CEO of Whitmore Holdings, the Wolf of Clay Street, the man who terrified senators and ate competitors for sport, bowed. It wasn't a nod. It wasn't a slight inclination of the head. It was a deep, formal, waist-bending bow. It was archaic. It belonged in a throne room, not a boardroom. It was a gesture of total, unequivocal fealty. William felt his legs give out. He collapsed back into his chair, the impact jarring his spine. But he didn't feel it. He couldn't feel his extremities. The blood was roaring in his ears like a jet engine. "No," he mouthed. "No." Michael held the bow for a long count of 3. When he straightened, he didn't let go of Tara's hand. He turned his head slightly, speaking into the microphone he still held, his voice carrying to every corner of the stunned room. "Good evening, Madam Chairwoman." The words hit William like physical blows. Madam. Chairwoman. The reality of it fractured his mind. The shadow board, the anonymous entity he had cursed, the cowards he had mocked, the barrier to his genius. It wasn't a committee of faceless bankers in Geneva. It was the woman he had asked to iron his shirt this morning. Tara squeezed Michael's hand briefly, then withdrew it. She stood up. As she rose, the navy dress that William had called invisible seemed to transform. In the spotlight, without William's shadow casting over her, the simplicity read differently. It read as discipline. It read as the kind of confidence that doesn't need sequence because it owns the building. "Hello, Michael," she said. Her voice wasn't amplified by a microphone, but in the dead silence, it carried. It was calm. Steady. "You're making a scene." "A necessary one," Michael replied, his voice grim. He stepped back, gesturing for her to take the space. He acted not as her superior, but as her guard. Tara looked at the crowd. She didn't shrink. She didn't fidget. She stood, with her weight evenly distributed, her chin level. She looked comfortable in the spotlight, in a way William never was. William posed for attention. Tara simply occupied it. Michael raised the microphone again. The tenderness vanished from his face, replaced by the cold, hard iron of the CEO. He turned to face the room. For 10 years, Michael boomed, Tara Burgess has been the majority shareholder of this firm. When the market crashed, she liquidated her family's private trust, assets that had been untouched for 3 generations, to cover our payroll. A murmur rippled through the room. She refused a seat on the board, Michael continued, pacing slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd. She refused a salary. She refused public credit. She told me, if they know it's me, they'll treat me differently. I want the truth, Michael, not the performance. He paused, letting the irony settle over the room like a heavy blanket. So she watched, Michael said. She sat in the back. She read the reports. She approved the budgets. And she vetoed the risks that would have destroyed us. He turned slowly, his body pivoting like a turret until he was facing table 4. William felt the gaze lock onto him. It was physical. It burned. He wanted to crawl under the table. He wanted to dissolve into the carpet. He looked at Marcus Sterling, desperate for an ally. But Sterling was leaning away from him, looking at William with open horror. Michael took a step toward the front tables. Tonight, Michael said, his voice dropping to a dangerous conversational volume, I was informed of a rumor circulating in the hall. He stopped 10 feet from William. The spotlight spilled over, catching William in its harsh, unforgiving edge. I heard, Michael said, that one of our employees introduced the chairwoman of the board to our investors as his maid. The silence shattered. Gasps turned into whispers. Heads whipped around. Eyes darted between Michael, Tara, and the man sitting at table 4 with a face the color of ash. William's throat was sealed shut. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't breathe. He looked up at Michael, pleading silently. Don't. Please. I'm your guy. I'm the partner. Michael didn't blink. He looked at William with profound disgust. Technically, Michael said, the word cutting through the air like a scalpel. It is true. He looked back at Tara, standing tall in the back of the room. She has cleaned up our messes, Michael said. She has organized our chaos. She has maintained the structure that puts food on your tables and pays for the tuxedos on your backs. She has served this company with a humility that none of you, especially the ambitious ones, could ever understand. Michael turned back to William. She has helped every single one of you keep your jobs, he said, including yours, Mr. Burgess, until today. The implication hung in the air, heavy and final. William felt a cracking sensation in his chest. It was the sound of his ego breaking. The narrative he had built, the hero, the visionary, the provider, wasn't just false. It was a joke. A cruel, cosmic joke played on a man who was too busy looking in the mirror to look out the window. Tara stepped forward then. She walked out of the shadows of the service entrance. She didn't walk toward William. She walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for her. It wasn't the polite parting they gave to executives. It was the terrified parting of the Red Sea. Men stepped back, tripping over chairs. Women pulled their dresses in. They looked at her with wide, panicked eyes, replaying every interaction they'd ever had with her, wondering if they had been rude, wondering if they had ignored the woman who signed their checks. Tara walked past table 4. William stared at her dress. The navy silk moved like water. He smelled her perfume, jasmine and rain. It was the same perfume she wore every day. The same perfume he had told her was too drugstore for a gala. She once didn't look at him. She didn't slow down. She didn't offer him a glance of anger or a glance of pity. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, as if he were the help. She reached the stairs to the stage. Michael was waiting there, hand extended to help her up. She took it, ascended the steps, and stood behind the podium. She looked small behind the heavy wood, but when she placed her hands on the lectern, the room seemed to shrink to fit her. She leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Michael," she said. Her voice was clear, lacking any tremble. She looked out at the room. She looked at the faces of the people she owned. "Please," she said, "sit down. We have work to do." William sat. But he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that he would never stand tall in this town again. The glass ceiling hadn't been above him. It had been the floor beneath his feet, and he had just smashed it with his own arrogance. He was falling, and there was no one left to catch him. "We have work to do." The sentence hung in the air, simple and devastating. William sat motionless at table 4, his hands gripping the tablecloth so tightly, his knuckles were white ridges against the linen. He watched the woman on the stage, searching for the wife he had left standing by the kitchen doors 10 minutes ago. He searched for the woman who asked him how to reset the Wi-Fi router, the woman who listened quietly while he practiced his pitches, the woman whose biggest concern, he believed, was whether he liked the roast chicken she made on Sundays. He couldn't find her. The woman behind the podium was a stranger. She stood with her shoulders squared, her hands resting lightly on the wood, commanding the room not with volume, but with a terrifying, absolute stillness. "Thank you, Michael," Tara said again, her eyes scanning the front row. When she spoke, William felt a fresh wave of vertigo. Her voice. It wasn't the soft, accommodating tone she used at home. It wasn't the voice that asked, "Did you have a good day, honey?" This voice was pitched lower. It was resonant. It had the sharp, clipped cadence of the Ivy League education she had never told him about. It was a voice that didn't ask for permission to speak. It granted permission for others to listen. "I have preferred the shadows for a decade," Tara continued, the microphone amplifying the crisp authority of her diction. "I believed that Whitmore Holdings needed a leader out front who could be a lightning rod, while I ensured the foundation remained solid. Michael has been that leader." She paused, and for a terrifying second, her gaze flickered toward table 4. "But shadows," she said, "can sometimes be mistaken for emptiness, and silence can be mistaken for weakness. Tonight, I was reminded that when leadership becomes disconnected from humility, the entire structure rots." The room was so quiet, William could hear the ice melting in his abandoned Scotch glass. "I heard a joke earlier this evening," Tara said. Her face remained impassive, but there was a razor's edge to her tone. "About good help being hard to find?" At table 4, Marcus Sterling flinched, as if he'd been slapped. He, along with the other 3 men who had been in that circle of laughter, stared fixedly at the floral centerpiece. The shame radiating off them was palpable, a heat wave of regret. They realized with sickening clarity that they hadn't just laughed at a colleague's wife. They had laughed at the hand that fed them. "I agree," Tara said softly. "Good help is hard to find, because true help isn't about fetching drinks or managing appearances. It is about stewardship. It is about protecting the livelihoods of 3,000 families when the market turns against you." She leaned forward slightly. "I am not your maid, but I serve this company. And starting tomorrow, I expect every person in this room to understand the difference between a title and a purpose." She stepped back from the microphone. She didn't mic drop. She didn't storm off. She simply nodded to Michael and stepped to the side, allowing the CEO to reclaim the podium. It was a masterclass in power. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cried. She had simply corrected the record and, in doing so, had reduced William's entire existence to a clerical error. Michael stepped back up. The reverence was gone from his face, replaced by the grim determination of an executioner. "Thank you, Madame Chairwoman," he said. He looked out at the room, his eyes hard. I want to be clear about the scope of Mrs. Burgess's contribution, Michael said, because there seems to be a profound misunderstanding of reality among some of our ambitious junior executives. William closed his eyes. Please stop, he begged silently. Please just fire me and let me leave. In 2018, Michael said, when the Asian markets collapsed, this firm faced a liquidity crisis. We lost 40% of our valuation in 3 days. William remembered 2018. He remembered it vividly. He had just been promoted to mid-level management. He remembered coming home to Tara, terrified he would lose his job, pacing the living room, ranting about how he was the only one holding his department together. He remembered the miracle that happened 2 weeks later, a sudden influx of capital that saved the division. He had taken credit for that. He had told his boss that his client retention strategy had stabilized the ship. He had come home and bought a Porsche with his bonus. The banks wouldn't touch us, Michael continued. The capital that saved us, the capital that paid for your bonuses that year, did not come from a mysterious foreign investor. It came from the Burgess family trust. Tara liquidated her grandmother's estate to cover the margin call. William felt like he was being strangled. The Porsche, the bonus, the watch on his wrist. She paid for it. He had bought a car to impress her with money she had secretly given him. He had strutted around the apartment, playing the provider, playing the savior, while she sat on the couch and smiled, knowing she had just sold her inheritance to save his ego. And the scholarship fund, Michael added, relentless. The Whitmore Future Leaders program that pays for the MBAs of our top junior associates? The program you graduated from, Mr. Burgess? William's head snapped up. That is not a corporate write-off, Michael said. That is a personal endowment. Tara Burgess wrote the check for your tuition, William. She has been investing in your potential since the day you started here. The air left William's lungs. He had bragged about that scholarship for years. He wore it like a badge of honor. He told everyone he had earned it through sheer grit and intellect. I beat out 50 candidates, he used to tell Tara. They saw something in me. They hadn't seen anything. She had just written a check. She had paid for his degree. She had paid for his job. She had paid for the suit he was wearing. She had paid for the very stage he was trying to stand on. William looked at the stage, at the woman in the navy dress. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a file Michael had handed her. She looked bored by the recitation of her generosity. The realization hit him not as a thought, but as a physical sickness. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a charity case. He was a kept man who had convinced himself he was a king. We have operated under her protection for a decade, Michael finished, and we repaid that protection with arrogance. Michael looked at William one last time. Enjoy your dinner. The sound system clicked off. The hum of the room returned, but it was different now. It was the sound of a pack turning on a wounded member. At table 4, the atmosphere curdled instantly. Marcus Sterling, the man who had been whispering conspiracies with William 5 minutes ago, cleared his throat loudly. He stood up, taking his napkin and his wine glass. I think there's an open seat at table 8, Sterling said to the room at large. He didn't look at William. He looked through him. I'll join you, Marcus, the VP of Sales said, standing up immediately. Me too, said the director of HR. One by one, the elite members of Table 4 stood up. They didn't make excuses. They didn't feign polite emergencies. They simply picked up their plates and glasses and moved. They dragged chairs to other tables, squeezing into crowded spots, sitting on the edges of conversations, doing anything to physically distance themselves from the blast radius. Within 60 seconds, William was alone. Table 4, the prime real estate, the center of the room, was an island. 7 empty chairs sat in disarray. William sat in the middle, surrounded by half-eaten appetizers and abandoned napkins. The isolation was absolute. It was a quarantine. People at nearby tables turned their backs, angling their shoulders to create a wall of black tuxedo wool. No one looked at him. To look at him was to catch the contagion of his failure. To be seen near him was professional suicide. A waiter approached with the main course, surf and turf. He looked at the empty chairs, then at William. The waiter hesitated. He looked toward the stage, where Tara was now speaking quietly with a senator. The waiter set a plate down in front of William. He didn't offer fresh pepper. He didn't refill the wine. He placed the plate down with a dull clink and walked away without a word. William stared at the steak. He stared at the lobster tail. It looked grotesque. He could feel the eyes of the room on his back, not seeing him, but actively unseeing him. He had spent his entire life terrified of being invisible. He had built a persona, a career, and a marriage designed to ensure he was seen. And now, sitting alone at the best table in the house, he realized the cruelest truth of all. He had finally achieved it. Everyone knew exactly who he was. He was the man who introduced the owner as the help. He was the fraud who thought he was a giant. He was the joke. William reached for his water glass, his hand shaking so violently the water sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth dark gray. He brought the glass to his lips, but he couldn't drink. His throat was closed tight, choked by the ashes of the bridge he had just burned. He looked toward the stage one last time. Tara was laughing at something the senator said. It was a genuine laugh, soft, elegant, real. She looked radiant. She looked light. She looked like a woman who had finally dropped a heavy, useless weight she had been carrying for 5 long years. The isolation at table 4 was loud. It hummed with the specific, nauseating frequency of social death. William sat there for what felt like an hour, though it was likely only minutes, staring at the gray stain on the tablecloth where his water had spilled. Around him, the gala had resumed, but the energy had mutated. The polite chatter was gone, replaced by the frantic, hushed gossip of people witnessing a corporate beheading. Every glance in his direction was a dart. Every whisper felt like his name. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't sit in the wreckage of his own ego while the rest of the room ate lobster. William looked up. Through the gap in the crowd, he saw Tara. She had moved to the VIP section, a raised platform cordoned off by velvet ropes near the stage. It was the inner sanctum, the place where senators drank with tech billionaires. Tara was seated on a plush velvet sofa, holding a flute of champagne. She wasn't shrinking into the cushions. She was leaning forward, engaged in a conversation with the mayor of San Francisco. She looked accessible. The delusion, battered and bruised as it was, flickered back to life in William's brain. It was a desperate, clawing thing. She's still Tara, he told himself, his heart rate spiking. She's still the woman who leaves her socks on the bathroom floor. She's still the woman I married. If he could just get to her. If he could just sit next to her, hold her hand, whisper an apology in her ear. He could spin this. He could tell the room and himself that he knew all along. That the Maid comment was an inside joke between a husband and wife who shared a quirky sense of humor. He could reclaim proximity. He just needed to be seen next to her. William stood up. His legs felt like jelly, but he forced them to move. He buttoned his jacket, smoothed his tie, and began to walk toward the VIP section. He moved like a ghost through the room. People saw him coming and physically recoiled, pulling their chairs in, turning their backs to create a wall of exclusion. He ignored them. He fixed his eyes on the velvet rope. He reached the base of the platform. Tara was only 20 feet away. She didn't see him. She was listening to the mayor? William took a step toward the opening in the ropes. A shadow fell over him. It wasn't a metaphorical shadow. It was a physical wall of black wool and cold intent. Michael Vance stepped into the gap, blocking the entrance. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a bouncer at the gates of heaven, and William was holding a ticket to hell. William stopped so abruptly he almost lost his balance. He looked up. Michael was taller than him, a fact William usually tried to ignore by wearing lifts in his shoes. Tonight, the height difference felt insurmountable. "Michael," William stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to step around, to look past the CEO toward his wife. I need to speak to Tara. She's my wife. I just want to clear this up." Michael didn't move. He crossed his arms over his chest. His expression was bored, which was infinitely worse than anger. "She's busy, William." "I know, The misunderstanding earlier," William rushed on, the words tumbling out in a panic. "The Maid comment. It was banter. You know how stress gets to me. I didn't mean it. I didn't know about the ownership. If I had known." "Stop," Michael said. The word was quiet, but it snapped William's mouth shut instantly. Michael stepped closer. He invaded William's personal space, forcing William to take a humiliating step back onto the main floor. They were now standing in the gap between the tables and the VIP rise, isolated in a pocket of tension. "You didn't know," Michael repeated, tasting the words like spoiled milk. "That seems to be the theme of your evening. Ignorance." "I was kept in the dark," William protested, a flash of his old defensiveness rising up. "How was I supposed to know? She never talks about work. She let me believe I was the one." "She let you believe you were the provider," Michael finished. "Yes, we know." Michael looked down at William with a terrifying calmness. "But you weren't just ignorant about the money, were you? You've been loud about other things, too." William blinked, confused. "What?" "The board," Michael said. "The shadow board. The anonymous committee that reviews internal proposals." William stiffened. "The ones who rejected the Argento deal. And the Kuala Lumpur expansion," Michael listed. "And the leverage buyout of the shipping firm in Oakland. And the crypto asset diversification strategy." "Yes," William seized on the topic, feeling on firmer ground. This was business. This was his grievance. "They've been blocking me for 5 years, Michael. I told you. They're risk-averse dinosaurs. They don't understand modern leverage. If they hadn't blocked Argento, I would have doubled our Q3 revenue." He looked at Michael, pleading for professional validation. "You know I'm right. You're a wolf, Michael. You know you have to hunt to eat. That board is a cage." Michael stared at him for a long, silent moment. He looked at William the way a scientist looks at a specimen in a jar. Something small, contained, and fundamentally simple. "You called them cowards," Michael said. "Last week in my office. You called the board faceless cowards who wouldn't know a good deal if it bit them." "I did," William admitted, his chin lifting slightly. "And I stand by it. I wanted to meet them face to face. I wanted to explain the complexity of the liquidity structures to them." Michael let out a short, dry sound. It wasn't a laugh. "William," Michael said softly, "there is no committee. There is no room full of bankers in Geneva." William frowned. "What?" Michael gestured over his shoulder, thumb hooking toward the velvet sofa where Tara sat. "Tara is the board." The world tilted. The floor seemed to liquefy under William's feet. I don't understand," William whispered. "Every proposal you wrote," Michael said, his voice relentless. "Every pitch deck, every risk assessment. I didn't send them to a committee. I sent them to your kitchen table." William's mind flashed back. He remembered late nights in their apartment, pacing the living room, ranting about the idiots on the shadow board, while Tara sat on the couch with her book, nodding, saying, "I'm sure it's frustrating, honey." He remembered throwing the rejection letter for the Argento deal on the counter, screaming that the board was incompetent. Tara had picked up the letter. She had read it. She had said, "Maybe they have a point about the liability, William." He had laughed at her. He had told her she didn't understand high finance. She read every word, Michael said. And she vetoed them. Why? William's voice was a high, thin whine. Why would she do that? I'm her husband. The Argento deal. That was my ticket to the partnership. Why would she sabotage me? Michael's eyes hardened into flint. Sabotage? Michael stepped forward again, forcing William back another step. Do you know what the Argento deal actually was, William? It was a high-yield merger with... It was a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, Michael cut him off. The Argento Group was funneling bribes to local officials in Jakarta. It was buried in their subledger, 3 layers deep. You missed it. William froze. No, I did due diligence. You did surface diligence, Michael corrected. You looked at the profit margins. Tara looked at the compliance records. If we had signed that deal, the SEC would have raided this building within 6 months. I would be in federal prison. And you? Michael leaned in. You wouldn't be a partner. You would be unhorrible. Indicted. William's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And the Oakland buyout? Michael continued, ticking them off on his fingers. The leverage ratio was illegal under current banking regulations. Tara caught it in 5 minutes. The crypto strategy? It was a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a tech IPO. She flagged it before the ink was dry. Michael dropped his hand. She didn't veto your deals because she was jealous, William. She didn't veto them because she was risk-averse. She vetoed them because they were incompetent. Or illegal. Or both. The word incompetent hung in the air between them. William felt a physical pain in his chest, a hollowness that was expanding rapidly. He had spent 5 years convincing himself he was a genius held back by bureaucracy. He had convinced himself he was a lion in a cage. She saved you, Michael said brutally. Every single time. I wanted to fire you 3 years ago, William. After the shipping debacle. I had the paperwork on my desk. I told her, he's a liability, he's dangerous. William stared at Michael, his eyes wide and wet. You wanted to fire me? Yes, Michael said. But she said no. He glanced back at Tara, who was now laughing softly at something the mayor said, completely unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, of the execution happening 20 feet away. She said, "Let him learn," Michael recounted. She said, "Give him a sandbox. Let him play. If he falls, I'll catch him. Just don't let him hurt the company." A sandbox. The metaphor hit William with the force of a wrecking ball. His career, his high-stakes meetings, his critical projects. It wasn't real. None of it was real. He wasn't a corporate shark swimming in the deep ocean. He was a toddler splashing in a plastic pool in the backyard, while his wife watched from the window to make sure he didn't drown in 3 inches of water. The shadow board wasn't an enemy. It was the bumper rails on a bowling lane. William choked. I thought I was providing for her. He looked down at his hands. He remembered the pride he felt when he bought her jewelry bought with bonuses she had funded. He remembered the way he explained the news to her, simplifying the big words, thinking he was educating her. She let you feel big, Michael said, his voice dropping to a quieter, almost pitying register. Because she knew how much you needed it. She made herself small so you could fill the room. She built a world where you could be the protagonist, William. Michael adjusted his cufflinks, the movement sharp and dismissive. But you never learned, Michael said. You never checked the subledgers. You never thanked the people who supported you. You just complained that the sandbox wasn't big enough. William looked up at the VIP section. Tara was sipping her champagne. She looked powerful. She looked distant. He realized now why she had tolerated his arrogance for so long. It wasn't submission. It was patience. It was the patience of a parent waiting for a child to tie their own shoes. And tonight, she had finally decided he was never going to learn. "She's not the maid," William whispered, the reality finally settling into the marrow of his bones. "No," Michael agreed. "Cold. And you are not the provider." Michael stepped back, clearing the path to the exit, but keeping the path to Tara firmly blocked. "The gala is for employees and partners," Michael said. "Technically, you are still an employee. But I think, given the circumstances, your presence is no longer structural." He pointed toward the main doors. "Go home, William. The playdate is over." William stood there for a second longer, looking at the man he had feared, and the wife he had underestimated. He felt stripped, naked. The tuxedo felt like a costume he had rented for a play he didn't know the lines to. He turned away from the VIP section. He didn't look at table 4. He didn't look at the colleagues who were studiously ignoring him. He walked toward the exit, his footsteps heavy on the plush carpet. He walked past the service entrance, where he had forced Tara to stand. The draft from the kitchen hit him, cold and smelling of grease. It was the only real thing he had felt all night. He wasn't the wolf of Clay Street. He was just a boy who had been allowed to sit at the grown-ups' table, and he had just spilled his milk. The air outside the hotel was biting, carrying the damp, salt-heavy chill of the San Francisco Bay. It was a physical shock after the hermetically sealed warmth of the ballroom, but William didn't button his jacket. He couldn't feel the cold. He couldn't feel anything except the frantic, vibrating need to fix the unfixable. He stood on the curb of Clay Street, exiled to the pavement, while the gala continued inside. He refused to leave. He paced a tight circle near the valet stand, ignoring the pitying looks of the parking attendants, who had likely seen him arrive in triumph hours earlier. He checked his watch. 11 o'clock. They would be leaving soon. He rehearsed his speech. He muttered the words under his breath, his hands chopping the air. "It was a strategy, Tara. I was playing 4D chess. I knew the board was watching, and I needed to appear humble, to show I wasn't distracted by family status. I did it to protect your privacy." It sounded thin, even to his own ears. He rephrased it. "I was drunk. The stress of the deal. I wasn't thinking. I'm sick, Tara. I need help. You can't leave a sick man." Better. That played on her sympathy. She loved fixing things. She loved saving him. He just needed to present himself as broken enough to require her intervention. The heavy glass doors of the hotel swung open. A wave of laughter and music spilled out, followed by the first group of departing guests. William shrank back into the shadows of a decorative planter, watching. He saw Marcus Sterling getting into a Tesla. He saw the junior partner he had snubbed earlier, laughing with a senator. Then, the doors opened wide, held by 2 doormen. Tara emerged. She was flanked by Michael on one side and the mayor on the other. She wasn't walking in anyone's shadow now. She was the gravitational center of the group. The wind caught the hem of her navy dress, whipping it around her legs, but she didn't shiver. She looked formidable. William's heart hammered against his ribs. He watched as Michael said something to her, shook her hand with that maddening respect, and stepped back. A car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the hired town car William had booked. The one he had complained was too old on the ride over. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, long and sleek, its black paint drinking the street lights. It moved with a silent, predatory grace. A uniformed driver stepped out, not a gig worker, but a professional chauffeur in a cap and gloves. He opened the rear door for Tara with a crisp efficiency that spoke of long-standing employment. William stared at the car. He realized, with a jolt of nausea, that this car had probably been parked in the garage of their building for years, or perhaps in a private garage nearby. It was a vehicle that cost more than William would earn in a decade. Tara moved toward the open door. Panic detonated in William's chest. If she got in that car, if that heavy door closed, it was over. The glass box would be sealed, and he would be on the outside forever. "Tara!" The shout tore out of his throat, ragged and desperate. He broke cover, sprinting across the sidewalk. He dodged a valet, nearly tripping over the curb. "Tara, wait!" She paused, one foot already inside the vehicle. She turned her head. The chauffeur moved to intercept, stepping between William and the car door, his hand raising in a clear warning. "Sir, step back," the driver said, his voice like gravel. "No, that's my wife!" William shouted, trying to push past the man's shoulder. "Tara, please!" Tara looked at the driver. She gave a small, weary nod. "It's all right, Evans. Let him speak." The driver hesitated, looking at William with open disdain, then stepped aside. He remained close enough to intervene, his posture tense. William lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the open car door. He gripped the metal as if it were a life raft in a storm-tossed sea. He was breathless, his hair wild, his tuxedo jacket flapping, open to reveal the sweat stains on his shirt. He looked down at her. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a sanctuary of cream leather and walnut wood. It smelled of money. Real money. Quiet money. Tara sat in the corner of the seat, her hands folded on her lap. She looked up at him, and for the first time that night, her expression wasn't blank. It was sad. "Tara," William panted, leaning in, invading the sanctuary. "Thank God. I thought you were leaving without me." "I am leaving without you, William," she said. Her voice was soft, barely louder than the hum of the idling engine. No, listen," William said, his words tumbling over each other. "I know how it looked in there. I know. It looked bad. But you have to understand the context, the pressure I was under." He gripped the door harder. "It was a joke, Tara. A stupid, panic-induced joke. I was trying to deflect. You know how those men are. They judge everything. If I introduced you as my wife, they would have picked you apart. They would have judged your dress, your background. I was trying to protect you." He widened his eyes, willing her to believe the lie. "I made you a maid so they wouldn't hurt you. It was a strategy, a shield." Tara watched him. She watched his mouth move, watched the sweat beat on his upper lip. She didn't blink. "A shield," she repeated. "Yes, exactly." William nodded frantically. "I took the heat so you wouldn't have to. I was trying to keep our private life private. I didn't want the world to corrupt what we have." Tara let out a breath. It was a long, shuddering exhale, as if she were releasing 5 years of held air. "William," she said. She reached out, not to touch him, but to adjust the hem of her dress. "You didn't introduce me as a maid to protect me," she said. "You introduced me as a maid because you were ashamed." "No," William protested. "I love you. I've never been ashamed." "Stop," she said. The command wasn't loud, but it silenced him instantly. She looked him in the eye. The streetlights reflected in her dark irises, making them look like deep wells. "You did it to protect your ego," she said clearly. "You walked into that room, and you felt small. You saw the chandeliers, and the partners, and Michael, and you felt like a fraud. And instead of dealing with that feeling, you decided to make yourself feel taller by standing on my neck." William flinched. "That's not fair." "It is the truth," Tara said. "You wanted to be the biggest person in the room, William. You wanted to be the protagonist. And you couldn't do that standing next to your wife. You could only do it standing next to a servant." She shook her head slowly. You needed me to be less so you could be more. I didn't know, William cried, his voice cracking. I didn't know you were the owner. If I had known. If you had known, Tara interrupted, you would have paraded me around like a trophy. You would have used my title to get your promotion. You would have used my money to buy respect instead of earning it. She looked at his hand, gripping the door. That is worse, William. Don't you see? That is infinitely worse. I can change, William pleaded. He dropped to his knees on the pavement, ignoring the wet concrete soaking into his trousers. He was at eye level with her now. I see it now. I see what I did. I see you. You're brilliant. You're powerful. You're the shadow board. My God, Tara, I respect you so much. I'm in awe of you. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back into her lap. I can fix this, he promised, tears spilling down his cheeks. We can be a power couple. Think about it. You and me running the firm. I'll listen to you now. I swear. I'll run every deal past you. I'll be the face, and you be the brains. We can rule this city. Tara looked at him with an expression that cut deeper than any anger. It was pity. Pure, unadulterated pity. You only see me now, she whispered, because Michael, bowed. No, that's not true. You had 10 years, William, she said. 10 years of dinners. 10 years of weekends. 10 years of waking up beside me. You could have asked me about my degree. You could have asked me why I understood the market. You could have asked me what I was reading when I sat on the couch. Her voice trembled slightly, the first crack in her armor. You never asked, she said. Not once. You talked at me. You used me as a mirror to admire your own reflection. And now, she looked at his desperate, tear-streaked face. Now you say you know who I am, she said, but you don't. You only know what the world just told you. You only care because I have power. You only respect me because other men bowed to me first. I love you, William sobbed. It was his last card, the only weapon he had left. Tara looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. She looked at the man she had saved, the man she had sheltered, the man she had hoped would grow up if she just gave him enough time and enough love. I know you do, she said softly. In your own way. You love the way I make you feel safe. You love the way I make you feel big. She leaned forward and grabbed the handle of the car door. But love without respect isn't a marriage, William, she said. It's a hostage situation, and I'm finally setting myself free. Tara, please! William lunged, trying to grab her arm. The driver moved instantly. A gloved hand clamped onto William's shoulder, yanking him back with bruising force. William tumbled backward onto the wet pavement, gasping. Tara didn't look back at him. She pulled the heavy door shut. The sound was final. Thud. The lock clicked. Through the tinted glass, William could see her silhouette. She was facing forward, looking at the driver. She didn't turn her head to see him sprawled in the gutter. The Rolls-Royce engine purred to life. The car pulled away from the curb, sliding smoothly into the San Francisco night, its taillights glowing, like red eyes in the fog. William stayed on the ground. The dampness seeped through his expensive tuxedo pants. The wind cut through his shirt. He watched the car disappear until it was just another light in the city he thought he owned. He was alone on Clay Street. He realized then that he hadn't just lost his job. He hadn't just lost his status. He had lost the only person in the world who had truly seen him, small, scared, and insecure, and had loved him anyway. And now, she was gone. And he was finally, truly, the biggest person in the room. Because the room was empty. The door of the Rolls-Royce didn't just close, it sealed. William scrambled up from the wet pavement, his knees aching, his tuxedo trousers soaked with street water. He lunged for the handle, his fingers slipping on the polished chrome. He pulled. It held. Through the tinted glass, he saw Tara lean forward. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the driver's console. She raised one hand, a small, precise gesture, and pressed a button on the armrest. Click. The sound was mechanical, sharp, and louder than the traffic on Clay Street. It was the sound of a vault closing. It was the sound of the sandbox being boarded up. William pounded on the glass with the flat of his hand. "Tara, open the door. You can't just leave me here." The window slid down. Not all the way, just 3 inches. A slice of open air. Enough for her voice to carry, but not enough for him to reach inside. William leaned down, putting his face near the gap, desperate to bridge the distance. The scent of the car's interior, leather and jasmine, wafted out, hitting him with the force of a memory. "Tara, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just let me in. We can talk about this at home." Tara sat in the shadows of the back seat. She turned her head slowly to look at him. Her face was framed by the streetlights reflecting off the wet glass. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive. She looked like a woman who had finished a very long book and was finally closing the cover. "We don't have a home, William," she said quietly. "I have a home. You have a stage." "Don't say that," William begged. "I live there. We built a life there." "I built a life," she corrected. "You performed one." She looked at his hands clutching the window frame, the knuckles white, the gold wedding band gleaming under the hotel marquee. A ring she had bought. A ring she had placed on his finger with promises he hadn't understood. "You like the image of success more than the work of it," Tara said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the fog like a lighthouse beam. "You always have. You wanted the title without the burden. You wanted the applause without the performance." She leaned back into the leather seat, retreating into the darkness where he couldn't follow. "Walk home, William," she said. William froze. "Walk? It's 3 miles. It's raining." "I know," Tara replied. "It will give you time to think about who you really want to be when there's no audience left to watch." She looked forward toward the windshield. "Go, Evans." "Tara!" The window hummed, sliding up to seal the gap. William snatched his fingers back just before the glass clicked into the frame. He stood there, panting, watching as the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb. It didn't screech its tires. It didn't speed. It glided into the traffic with the effortless momentum of true power, merging into the stream of red taillights heading up the hill. William watched it go. He watched until the distinct shape of the car blurred into the San Francisco fog, becoming just another phantom in the mist. He was alone. The silence that followed was heavy. The valet stand was only 20 feet away. 2 parking attendants in red vests were pretending to study a clipboard, studiously avoiding eye contact with the man who had just been discarded by a limousine. A group of guests from the gala smoked under the awning, their laughter carrying over the wind, sharp and oblivious. William shivered. The adrenaline that had fueled his frantic chase was draining away, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. He looked down at himself. His patent leather shoes were scuffed. His tuxedo trousers were stained with mud and oil from the gutter. His jacket was unbuttoned, his tie crooked. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call an Uber. His thumb hovered over the app. "Walk home, William." He stared at the screen. He could call a car. He could be home in 15 minutes. He could beat her there, stand in the driveway, and demand a conversation. He could try to spin this, try to strategize, try to find the angle that would let him win. But his battery was at 4%. And for the first time in his life, William didn't have the energy to hustle. He slid the phone back into his pocket. He turned north, facing the steep incline of the street. The fog was rolling in off the bay, thick and gray, swallowing the tops of the skyscrapers. It was the kind of cold that seeped into the bones. William began to walk. The first few blocks were fueled by a lingering, indignant shock. How could she, he thought, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. After everything? I made a mistake. One mistake. But as the incline increased, as his breath began to hitch in his chest, the indignation faltered. The physical exertion stripped away the mental defenses. One mistake? He passed a bistro where couples sat in the window, drinking wine. He saw a man laughing at something a woman said, leaning in to listen, not waiting to speak. Listening. William looked away. You never asked, Tara had said. He kept walking. The blocks blurred. The noise of the financial district faded, replaced by the quiet, tree-lined streets of the residential hills. The wind picked up, whipping his tuxedo jacket around him. He felt ridiculous. A man in a tuxedo walking alone in the rain was a tragedy or a joke. There was no in-between. He passed a shop window, a high-end watch boutique closed for the night. The security lights inside illuminated the displays of Swiss chronographs resting on velvet pillows. William stopped. He looked at his reflection in the glass. The man staring back at him was handsome, objectively. He had the jawline. He had the hair. He wore a suit that cost $4,000. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe that Tara had given him for his 30th birthday. An investment in time, the card had read. He looked at the watch. He looked at the suit. They were props. Everything he was wearing, everything he owned, everything he was, had been paid for by the woman he had called a maid. He leaned closer to the glass. He looked into his own eyes. They looked terrified. They looked like the eyes of a child who had gotten lost in a department store. I am a costume, he thought. The realization was cold and absolute. There is no William Burgess. There is only the performance of him. He had spent his life terrified of being small. He had built layers of armor, arrogance, volume, status, to hide the fact that he felt insignificant. And in doing so, he had become exactly what he feared. Hollow, he touched the glass, his fingerprint leaving a smudge over his own reflection. I don't know who I am, he whispered to the street. The wind didn't answer. The watches didn't tick. He pushed off the glass and kept walking. The rain began to fall harder, washing the gel out of his hair, soaking his shirt. He didn't run. He walked with a grim, plodding determination. He felt the blisters forming on his heels in the stiff dress shoes. He welcomed the pain. It was real. It was the only honest thing he had felt all night. Finally, after an hour, he turned the corner onto their street. The apartment building rose into the fog, elegant and imposing. It was a pre-war masterpiece, stone and iron. He knew the mortgage was paid. He knew the doorman's name was Henry. But as he approached the entrance, looking up at the penthouse windows, he saw that the lights were off. Tara was there. She had to be. But the apartment was dark. William stopped at the gate. He looked at the keypad. He knew the code. 10-14-18, their anniversary. He reached out to punch it in. His hand hovered over the keys. He remembered the sound of the lock clicking in the Rolls-Royce. We don't have a home, William. I have a home. He dropped his hand. He realized then that the walk wasn't over. The physical distance was closed, yes. He was standing in front of the building, but the distance between him and the life inside, that was an ocean. He couldn't just punch a code and go back upstairs. He couldn't walk in, take a shower, and climb into bed next to her, as if the last 4 hours hadn't incinerated their reality. If he went up there now, he would just be the actor returning to the set after the show had been canceled. William stood in the rain, looking up at the dark window. He imagined Tara inside. Maybe she was sitting by the window, watching him. Maybe she was already asleep, finally resting without the burden of managing his ego. He took a breath. It was a shaky, wet breath, but it filled his lungs. He looked down at his watch, the Patek Philippe. He undid the clasp. The heavy gold weight fell into his palm. He looked at it for a second, then placed it gently on the low stone wall of the garden planter, next to the gate. He took off his cufflinks. He placed them next to the watch. He couldn't strip off the suit. That would be madness, but he could shed the symbols. He could stop wearing the costumes she had bought him. William Burgess straightened his spine. He wasn't big. He wasn't a partner. He wasn't a hero. He was cold, wet, unemployed, and alone. But for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't pretending. He turned away from the gate. He didn't punch the code. He didn't buzz the doorman. He turned back toward the street, toward the long, dark hill leading down into the city. He didn't know where he was going to sleep tonight. A hotel, maybe. A cheap one he could pay for with the cash in his wallet. He began to walk again, his footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. It was a long way down. But as he walked away from the penthouse, away from the shadow of the woman who had carried him, William felt a strange, terrifying spark in his chest. It wasn't hope. It was too early for hope. It was simply the realization that, for the first time, the ground beneath his feet was solid, and the steps he was taking were his own. Some stories end with forgiveness and a dramatic reunion. But this story ended with the harsh, necessary gift of consequences. William didn't drive away in the Rolls-Royce. He walked away in the rain. Yet, in losing everything he thought he needed, he may have finally found the one thing he was missing: himself. Looking back, do you think Tara made the right choice by leaving him on the curb? Was it an act of cruelty, or was it the ultimate act of love to finally force him to grow up? And ask yourself, would you have done what Tara did? Would you protect your partner's ego from the shadows for 10 years? Or do you believe that a relationship built on hidden truths is destined to crumble? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like to let us know. Your feedback and support drive us to create more. Stay tuned for more powerful stories